Who are you?
Okay, so my name is Christian Fauteux. I live in Lausanne, in Switzerland. Um, I have two children. I like mountains. I like running. I'm a trail runner. My current job is the executive director of the Human Brain Project. So I lead what is called the HBP Project Coordination Office at EPFL, which is a Swiss university. And my role is to act as an intermediary between our funder, the European Commission, and a very large and diverse group of scientists who work in the HPP.
And so what brought you to this field? Can you describe your path and why you think it's important?
I had a research career before turning towards management. So I was an engineer and a material scientist. I worked in nanomaterials, crystallography, laser processes for about 9 years. I have a Ph.D. I did postdocs in 3 different labs. And then I became a bit unsatisfied by research. I was relatively successful. I had many papers published, but I wanted to have more impact than just publishing derivative results in journal articles that very few people would ever read. And so I decided that an academic research career was not for me, and I would not become a professor. So I applied for a job at the Blue Brain Project at the time to be involved in starting something called the Human Brain Project, and I got it. And so that's how I became involved in the HPP before it even started.
Oh, excellent. Okay. And can you speak to the nature of the Human Brain Project as it stands now? What are its goals, and have the goals changed since its inception?
Yes. Yeah, well, I'd just like to clarify something. I'm not in charge of the science of HPP. I'm in charge of let's say, the coordination and management of HPP. So I'm a member of something called the Human Brain Project Directorate. It has 6 members, and we each have our domains. And so mine is coordination, administrative management, and I'm in charge of topics like governance, project management, reporting, finances, quality assurance, risk management, communications, disseminations, and so on. But I can, of course, speak about the project, and I've been with it for so many years that I have a relative understanding of it. I'm not a specialist in neuroscience. So what are its goals? What is HPP trying to do? So HPP is trying to bring together neuroscience, medicine, and advanced information and communication technologies, ICT, linking research areas that are with new technologies to unlock synergies. So there is both an effort to perform strategic research on the brain, both on rodent and human, and an effort to create tools and services that will be made available to neuroscientists to enable them to perform more research on the brain, but on a different scale with these new technologies.
Okay, and so going back to your job as, can you give an example, for example, of risk management, or what are your sort of daily activities in the things that you do? And then we'll get back to the goals of HPP.
Okay, well, my daily activities, I'm involved in a lot of strategic planning, because a project of this scale with such a budget, for example, we're planning now the final phase, which will be 150 million euros for 3 years. You need to have a very solid plan, and so I work a lot on helping the scientists and supporting them and guiding them towards frameworks for strategies that work and that we'll be able to explain to our funders, to the public, and so on. I work with also lots of other managers and specialists in my own team and with partners to we deal with things like reporting, which is very important for the European Commission. We also deal with quality assurance and risk management, as I mentioned. So a project of the size of HPP involves many risks, both risks that touch on the political, like Brexit has a huge impact on HPP, for example, or that are related to the science itself. So we are engaging into very risky science. It may or may not work. Our initial plan was based on a series of interconnected results. If one fails, then the rest doesn't happen, and so on.
Okay, yeah, that brings a good point about the sort of ethical and moral implications of some of the goals of the HPP, not only its structure, but and the nature of the project itself, but also its motivations and sort of the spirit of the creation of it. So can you speak to a little bit about the ethical and moral implications of what you're trying to do as you yourself, actually, and also part of the HPP as a whole?
Well, the ultimate goal of the HPP is to understand the brain. I mean, will we understand the brain after 10 years of project? Probably not. It's not probably way more in the future. But we will have made some relative progress, and also have provided neuroscientists with tools that they need, or started changing the approach to reach that. Understanding the brain, it means understanding ourselves as humans. So it has it has, of course, serious ethical implications. I mean, there will be technologies that will be derived from knowledge of the brain that could have a huge negative impact if they are used by the wrong people. Already, for example, there's a big part of this project that has to do with what we call neuromorphic computing. So it means creating computers that are based on neural circuits. And emulating the ways the brain functions. So that has very important applications potential applications in AI, for example. And that could be used for all sorts of wrong reasons. Also, ways to understand what is taking place in the mind of someone could also come out of this project, interfaces with the brain. And this is also potentially dangerous. But we have a significant part of this project that is studying the ethical implications and the impact on society the Human Brain Project will have. They're following an approach called responsible research and innovation. And the HPP is very much advanced and at the forefront of such approaches and ethical approaches in research. And we're very proud of that. And so we have researchers, we have philosophers, for example, Katinka Evers at the University of Uppsala and Bernstahl at the Montfort University, who are really working on this. And there was in the first parts of the project, there was something called the Foresight Lab, which was looking into the implications of the technology and so on. And we've published a number of articles that we call opinions on different topics. The last one was the opinion on dual use, so the potential for military use for HPP technology. And this is available and published. So we are studying this carefully.
Excellent. That's good to hear. And that's an important point. And so you mentioned we talked about the ethical and moral implications and also the neurocomputing or neuromorphic computing. Can you elaborate on maybe some of the other sub-projects of the HPP, and which do you find most interesting personally given your background?
Well, that's a good question. Well, of course, one of the key sub-projects of HPP is brain simulation. Simulation was at the heart of the initial idea and vision behind the Human Brain Project proposed by its founder, Professor Henry Markram. And this is very fascinating. It's basically a different way to try to understand the brain by creating models that are driven by vast amounts of data gathered at different scales in the human and also in animal brains and simulate them in different conditions and see if principles emerge that will help us understand how functions of the brain emerge from such models. And that is that is for me very fascinating. And this is already being used, different modeling approaches and simulation approaches for maybe not at the molecular or even at the neural scale, but with point neuron models. It is already being used to derive medical applications. and there's a clinical trial that will start soon.
Okay, here's sort of another personal question, like which you made me think about during your last answer. You're involved in something huge. This is a huge, major paradigm shift in our understanding of the brain and the implications, like you say, not only moral and ethical, but technological, cultural, societal. You're essentially involved in a project that's reverse engineering the brain that could have dramatic changes in the future. There's something called the technological singularity, which I'm sure you're aware of, and all of those things behind that. How do you connect yourself and your daily activities to this grand purpose of what you're doing? So you're a human and you're studying humans, you're studying the human brain, or you're involved in a project that's reverse engineering or studying. How do you make that connection between just your daily life and this grander project?
Well, this is actually what drives me. I mean, what I do is not always very exciting nor very fun. We're trying to hurdle cats, or we're trying to get contributions from hundreds of scientists, for example, in the reporting phases, to produce a report that will explain what we have done and will justify the spending. And this demands a lot of menial work and a lot of administrative work, but also a lot of project management. And I lead the team that is responsible for that. And what drives me is that we're trying to do something that has real impact in terms of society and technology, and also that it's so complex. I mean, that's what I find interesting. Maybe that's from my engineering or scientific background, but I'm attracted by complex and challenging things. And if there wasn't any challenge, if it was just a small project, I wouldn't be interested in doing what I do for the HPP. Excellent. And I think that also drives many people in my team.
Excellent. A couple things about obstacles and challenges I wanted to ask you about. I know the HBP is involved in exascale computing and supercomputers. Can you elaborate a little bit on the meaning of exascale computing and the need for it and the challenge for it?
Exascale computing means it's several orders of magnitude more powerful in terms of flops of computing power, and also in terms of storage, which is also an important dimension for computing. And at the outset of the project, we thought, the leaders of the project, that especially the ones that are involved in supercomputing centers, they thought the Human Brain Project and brain simulation is what will drive Exascale. It's what will force the technological advances that are needed to justify and to develop exascale computing. Now, that didn't pan out exactly like this, because the need for supercomputing beyond petascale, which is what was the computing centers that were built like a few years ago, didn't immediately appear, but now it's coming. And also, I guess, I'm not an expert in computing technology, and other partners in HPP could better answer this, but I think the jump from peta to exa will prove more difficult than was thought before.
Okay. Can you, from my own Ph.D. work, and I did brain simulation as well. And what about the necessity of doing simulation? Why is that such a need to try and simulate the brain or to model the brain?
I think there are many reasons. I mean, one of the reasons is that you can't do experiments that you would normally do on animals on humans. So there's no way you can get the sort of data that you would need to really understand the brain with humans as you would do with animals. Also, we actually want to reduce the scale of animal experimentation and also its consequences on the animals. So that's one, let's say, more ethical reason. I think another reason is that the very the experimental approach that has been followed so far by neuroscience is not reaching the results that, well, no one knows if we are anywhere near understanding the brain with that approach. So I think it's a new approach, a different approach, and it has to be tried.
Yeah, like that you're elaborating on what I would like to refer to as a unified theory of brain dynamics.
Yes.
In a theoretical sense, theoretical neuroscience sense. So modeling the brain, analogous to, for example, a unified theory of electromagnetism from Maxwell, or a grand unified theory in physics, unifying general relativity and quantum mechanics. Do you think that, just from your work at HBP, do you think that such a unified grand theory of the brain and its functions and operations is achievable?
Well, I think some people in HBP think it's achievable. I'm not sure. I have no. I'm not a specialist. I wouldn't be able to say if that's possible. I think it's not really. And what happened over the years in HBP, we're now in year 6 almost. Is that we kind of reduced some of the ambition to bringing down to a more realistic level of what is possible to achieve with the funds available and the dynamics. I mean, it's different to do 15 projects of a certain size and to do one big one that goes in the same direction. And you hit there are economies of scale, but at some point you also hit some challenges due to the scope and size of the project, and to get everybody going in the right direction. And so I think if we had, for example, 1 billion euros for a single organization, for a single lab to develop something, it would have been very different than doing it with 130 organizations as we're doing it now. But also there are advantages to having so many people involved. I mean, we have lots of ideas that are coming in, lots of diversity. So actually, yeah, I think it's probably better even to try to attempt something like the HPP.
Okay. You make me think of 2 things when you just said there: the complexity or the scale of the project and its systemization, and also the relationship between such a scientific endeavor and policy. And the politics and the economics of science. Science can be very, very slow. How do you personally balance? How do you balance the geopolitics? Well, not the geopolitics of it, but the economic and political implications with the scientific motivation. If you don't have funding, science doesn't get done. But science is really one of the only things we have to sort of move the human story forward, I guess, in an idea.
Right. I mean, this is an important point, because it's at the heart of what we do, and also at the heart of what the changes that took place in the HPP over time. So at the beginning, the flagship program, so that funds us, was conceived as Europe's attempt to try big science. Before that, Europe was spending a lot of money on science, but it was doing so on individual projects. And so it saw what happened in the US with the Human Genome Project, with all sorts of other projects, and it thought, okay, I want to do something big as well. So it decided to devote a significant amount of money to 2 projects that were selected in the first round of the flagships. And the Human Brain Project was conceived as a fundamental science project. We never claimed at the beginning that we would have any impact on the economy of Europe, for example.
Okay.
As opposed to the other flagship project, Graphene, which was based on developing a new industry and putting it in the marketplace.
Right.
And then as we went further, the politics around research in Europe changed, and more there was a need for the European Commission, to show that the euros they was spending in research had an actual impact, socioeconomic impact. So we are gearing more and more our project towards that socioeconomic impact, both in health, so on patients, and also on the economy, by developing technologies that we hope to put on the market, or building the research infrastructure that I alluded to, which would help other scientists to explore the brain and model and simulate.
Okay.
And so we've had some pressure from the founders to be much clearer on the impacts on the economy and on the industry, and this comes from the politics of Europe. I mean, I'm Canadian, and I was new to European politics, and I discovered this very complex system of the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission, and how decisions are made, and so on. And so the politics of Europe have an impact on HPP because we're in 19 countries in Europe.
Okay.
And so the national contributions and the fights between the different countries and with the center in Brussels, they all impact the dynamics of HPP.
Okay. And I just can't imagine how you can navigate that and keep this balance and keep the project going and keep motivating, sort of convincing people and persuading people that it's an important project and that it needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine how you can navigate that.
Well, luckily, the Commission actually helps us navigating that. So that they play a big part. So the people that we work with that manage the HPP on the Commission side, they play a big part in helping us navigate this. And they say, oh, yeah, you've got to be at that event. You've got to convince this and that person and so on.
Okay. How do you personally and also as a system, as an institution, right, as a project, deal with challenges from other experts in the field? For example, a lot of people argue that the brain is not like a computer, or it's not an information processing device. How do you square those challenges or obstacles from external people and points with the project and you personally?
I see. Yeah, I read these papers on that different approaches basically to understand the brain, and this is something that even takes place inside the HPP. I mean, inside the HPP, there are different conceptions of what it means to understand the brain and how we will do it. I mean, I remember a few months ago I was in a science board meeting, and they started arguing on the definition of mind and what it meant when we said understanding the mind and so on, or consciousness. And so these different approaches, it seems that they collide routinely in and around HPP. I think the way I see this personally is that it's important to cultivate many approaches to understanding the brain, because we don't know which one will prove to work. And maybe many of them can lead to different types of understanding. And along the way, through the journey, which is really what's valuable, we will learn new things, develop new technologies, develop new approaches, develop new collaborations. And I think it's very valuable. And neuroscience is I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, but what I've seen of neuroscience is that it's a very, very vivid and active community that is, it seems like they fight a lot. They have different opinions, and it's at the forefront of thinking. And because people are so into it because of the consequences it has on knowing who we are as humans.
Okay. And so another personal question, given your path and your journey that led up to this point and what you're doing now, is there someone that you would like to meet? And if there's someone you would really like to meet and pick their brain about something, what would you like to ask them?
Right. There's so many people I would like to meet. I think I mentioned I was a runner before, so I would be very interested to meet a guy like Kilian Jornet, who's a very inspiring champion trail runner and sky runner and mountaineer, who's accomplished incredible feats of human performance, endurance, and that require incredible endurance and motivation. And so I would ask him, why do you do this? And what motivates you to attempt such feats? And how do you do this? How do you go beyond what is thought to be physically possible?
Awesome. Great. That's wonderful. And so another question, I think your job is in very, very important. It's extremely important and a necessary condition for moving the human brain project forward. The So you've made all of these connections throughout your life, and that's led you to this point. You've received so much help from many different people along the way. Have you in turn mentored, or how can you give back and move another person's story forward?
Yes, I mean, there was I had a friend who was whom I did my PhD and masters with him. We worked on similar topics, and we were working together on papers. So I think we influenced each other a lot. We inspired each other a lot. We also worked together in Switzerland afterwards, and that was really, we were kind of in competition in some ways. It was never stated that way, but we were constantly pushing each other towards more and more ambitious goals and different horizons. He moved to Switzerland and changed research topics completely. So I followed him and moved to Switzerland and changed research topics. And then I moved with my family in Europe. It was a big jump into the unknown. And then I moved into management, and then he moved into management, and so on. So yeah, I think we really had, we influenced each other a lot, and we had lots of impact on each other's lives.
Excellent.
Unfortunately, he passed away 2 years ago, but he remains very important in my life.
Excellent, excellent. And so finally, goals and outlook and moving forward. What are the goals? Are they reasonably achievable, both personally with the HPP and in your own life? And is there a relationship between your own personal goals and the goals in your job?
Yes. So I've been working in the academic world for all my career, basically. First as a researcher, and then as some kind of manager, and then executive. And so I was always interested to discover how it is in the corporate world. And I read a lot of Harvard Business Review and such on how I'm really interested in how tech companies work and how businesses work. And so we're doing something like that in HPP, which I find very interesting. It is what really motivates me to carry on working in HPP. We're building this research infrastructure. So we're going to offer services and tools to the neuroscientific community on a very large scale. And that has become one of the main goals, if not the main goal of HPP, to build that research infrastructure and then figure out how we're going to offer it. Finding user communities, going into marketing, convincing people to adopt the approaches that we're promoting in the HPP and adopt the tools, convincing states that there is a community in their country that would like to use these tools, and so on. And so we are developing kind of a business approach in HPP, which I find very interesting.
Okay, and how do you score those goals with your own personal goals in your life, and where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Yeah, well, in 10 years, I probably won't be in HPP anymore, because HPP will be over in 4 years, but HPP will become something else. Okay. And after the end of this 10 years, there will be something left, the research infrastructure, that will have a life of its own. And so I hope I have a role to play in that future research infrastructure. And for me, it would be making the transition from working in the academia to working for a business. And the way this, I mean, I mentioned the project coordination office earlier. That's the unit that I lead at the EPFL. It's pretty much a startup. So it's a group. We're 37 people now, and we're growing over the years. We have lots of turnover because we're changing focus and so on. And we're constantly changing, and now we're coming to a phase in which we will have to find a market for what HPP is building, and our survival will depend on that. And so that I find very interesting. It's a new challenge that goes beyond. I mean, I've done now HPP for 6 years. Mm-hmm. It goes beyond the challenge of coordinating a large collaboration.
Okay. Dr. Christian Fauteux, thank you very much for your time, and you're moving your own story forward and the human story forward in a very impressive way. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.